All right, good morning, y'all. Sunrise sermon on a Sunday morning. Let's get into this one. This one is going to get touchy. It's going to get touchy because of the subject, right? And it's one of those subjects where people tend to debate the things that they think are right, and they may or may not hit all the points that are relevant, but they think they've said enough to be heard and understood, and that's where we tend to falter sometimes in our arguments, especially in our theological arguments. We want to be heard, but we don't want to be necessarily understood. And what we need to get together with in our concentration and our consecration is we may want to be heard, but we need to let the Spirit speak and lead us in speaking before we just spout out everything that doesn't fit, that doesn't match, that isn't relevant. So when we talk about theological debate, it's not about you being heard. It's about the people coming to an understanding from the perspective of the scriptures. The text says Paul reasoned with them out of the scriptures. They debated over the text, not over their thoughts. And that's where we tend to fail sometimes when we talk about theology and theological debate. We start talking about what we think rather than what we've actually studied. That's where we miss the mark. Check it out. So, finding out your friend is a devil. What do you do? What do you think is happening when you find out your friend is a devil? Your friend, someone that you've been hanging with, someone that you've been close to, someone that you've been nice to, someone you've been with, finding out that person is a devil. What do you do? And I thought it'd be hats off to a character like David, right, who could handle being harassed by his employer, his royal employer, the king, as well as father-in-law in the same person. But no, Jesus gives us a real depiction of knowing you're headed to the cross and knowing that one of the people that you've been leading is handing you over to the enemies, to the church leaders, to the Romans for 30 pieces of silver. Jesus. 30 pieces of silver. That's just the amount that he received or they were willing to give him. The speaking of Judas in the betrayal of Jesus, the caveat of all that is they wouldn't take it back when he brought it back because it was dirty money. It had been used to kill a man. And that's pretty sad. So here we go. Jesus has been sharing some heavy insight about his ministry, his mission, and all of a sudden he's struck with the response of the disciples who say, they know and accept that Jesus is the one, that he's the man. He's the Holy One. And Jesus goes further and says, you know what? I chose 12 of you, but one is a devil. I chose 12 of you, but one is a devil. And let's give John credit, because John has one of those rare gospels where he follows up a lot of what he says with a very quick summation, right? And we'll reference John again in a minute. John also says this. He, talking about Jesus, was speaking of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, one of the 12 who would later betray him. That's John chapter 6. And we're getting a spoiler alert already. John chapter 6. Spoiler alert. One of these dudes is going to betray Jesus, who they just proclaimed as the Holy One, the Messiah. Come on. So when we look at this text coming from John, right? Look at this text coming from John chapter 6. We're seeing it embedded in a proclamation of Jesus being distinguished as a Messiah by his followers, and Jesus pointing out that, yeah, there's 12 of y'all, but one of you is a devil. And then John points out, yeah, and he was talking about Judas. Whoa. Whoa. Right? And what was, what's interesting is John, like I said, his commentary on Judas in particular is like a reality TV, side interview or something, when they like interview cast members on the side after they've had an experience with someone. Because he says some stuff about Judas in commentary that you're like, well, man, did he like the guy, or is this him reflecting back? What in the world was going on between them, right? And, John's gospel is one of the later gospels written, right? We get it in a very easy flow framework where it comes about, and it's not as quick paced as Mark, which is Jesus on the move, right? And it does contain some unique aspects of storytelling that we don't get from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are the synoptic gospels. And so John, being one of the latter gospels published, shares and shows us another perspective on Jesus, if I could say it that way, with a theme that's outside of the realm of trying to convince a specific crowd. It's more generalized. And John It's about belief in the deity of Jesus. That's why it has that particular opening that it has that matches up with Genesis 1 and 1 in the beginning, right? And let's say it like this: John is focused on belief in the deity of Jesus as the Messiah, as the Son of God, as God, and in faith and love as underlying themes. But here's what John says about the friend, the fellow disciple, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This, he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. Man, what an accusation. This is John, the disciple whom the Lord loved, as he describes himself, who is saying, hey, man, this Judas character, this is how he got down. This is how he handled things. And when we look at this Judas character and this depiction of him, we see John telling it and saying more than just what happened. John is giving additional commentary and insight into who Judas was. How do we know he was a devil? Jesus called him a devil. How do we know he was the betrayer of Jesus? John said, look, in hindsight, we should have known this guy was the treasurer. He had the box. He was dipping into the box, and he was bound to betray Jesus. He didn't even care about the poor. He just wanted to know, where was the money at? How come they didn't bring the money in? And we could get a little bit of it, and he could skim some off the top. John is giving insight into the character of who Judas was as part of the ministry of Jesus. So Judas Iscariot, not being a Galilean, but being this zealot who was trying to, quote unquote, fit in, right? He still had ambition. He still had ideas about how and where God should play a role in removing the Roman rule from on the heads of the Jewish occupants in Palestine. Judas was a believer in the uprising and the Lion of Judah coming in and wiping out the enemy. And so this peaceful Jesus wasn't getting it. But it still provided an opportunity, as John points out, right? Keep in mind what John points out. John points out, hey, man, he handled the money, and he would get and dig into the money as he saw fit without any question or problem. This guy did it. This guy handled it like that. This was who we were talking about. And so John gives commentary into the character of Judas so that we can see in hindsight, man, we should have known from the beginning that this guy was not totally in line with what Jesus was doing. But that's how John differs from the other Gospels, right? And so when John is giving this additional commentary on who Judas is, ask yourself, when you study the Bible, are you paying attention? Are you aware of it? Are you noticing it? Are you coming across this text and saying, oh, wait a minute, right? This is giving us insight into who this person is. When we're reading the Bible and studying the Bible, sometimes we're just trying to get through the chapter and say, man, look, man, I burned through another chapter of another gospel. I'm on my way. I'm on pace to finishing the Bible in a year, or even less than a year. Okay, but did you let it sink in? Did you taste it and it was sweet like honeycomb to your spirit? That's what we're seeing here. And so imagine you're Jesus and you're leading a group of people, and one of the people closest to you, one of your leads, one of your other level leads, is going to be the one that betrays you. Imagine you're Jesus and you know you have a mission to get to Calvary, but you know what you've got to go through to get there, and then you look across the table and here's the one who's going to betray you looking you in your eyes as if to say, my bad. Imagine what Jesus must have felt. Imagine what Jesus must have. It probably was a deep sigh when Jesus was like, all right, go and do what you need to do quickly. As others assumed that he was going to take care of some affairs with the ministry, but he was going to go get the chief priest, captain of the guard, to turn Jesus in that night. You've got to not just look at this character who was exposed as a devil, but look at the character that was demonstrated by Jesus in, what's it say? How you work with difficult people, how to win friends and influence others. Look at the character Jesus demonstrated in the midst of group dynamics, right? Because you still got Peter talking about, Lord, I'll never betray you. I'll never deny you, right? You still got the disciple whom the Lord loves leaning and reclining on the chest and bosom of the Lord while he's trying to break bread and share some things about times to come. You've got John being clingy, right? You've still got John and James saying, hey, when you come into your kingdom, hook us up. Put us on each side of you. I'll be good to you, right? And so in all this, Jesus demonstrates character and characteristics worth imitating. You get it? Jesus is demonstrating characteristics worth imitating. And he does that in such a way to where we might just bypass it. We might just overlook it. We might just see it and say, well, that's cool. No. Jesus is doing something that is on a whole nother level. Jesus is doing something and demonstrating something that's on a whole nother level that most of us haven't caught up with yet because we've been too focused on, man, that took a lot of nerve for homeboy to be up there sitting at the table with Last Supper with Jesus and, grabbing the bread at the same time as the Master and Messiah and hit. No, Jesus shows us an example worthy of following. When you find out that your friend is a devil, that's your time to be very direct with your friend. When you find out your friend is a devil, that's the time to have very limited expectations of things turning around with your so-called friend. When you find out that your friend is a devil, you ought to know that the prophecy of Zechariah, right? The prophecy of Zechariah is so ready to be thrown out there that it's going to happen in your time before you know it, because you're sitting up here trying to figure out how did they arrive at 30 pieces of silver. It was already in the books. It was already in the prophecy. It was already set as part of the messianic prophecy that was there, so that we would know and recognize this had to be the Messiah, because look at the paper trail of what is connected to the Old Testament here in this New Testament experience. That's what that is. And so judge not this on what you learn about the devil. Judge this on what you learn on what to do when you figure out and find out that your friend is a devil. God bless.